Joined now by Jamie Tozer, operator writer for the Station Nation blog that covers the St. John Sea Dogs. Jamie, this is a rebuild coming off the Memorial Cup, but the Sea Dogs are in the playoff race. This is a team that's been competitive in most of their games. Are you surprised that this team is fighting for playoff positioning after having lost so many pieces last year?
When you look at the numbers, it doesn't look like it's been a great season for the Sea Dogs, and I think the numbers kind of are what we expected. But when you look kind of closer at what they're actually doing on the ice, I think this has been about as good as you could have hoped for a season. They've got very few players with Q experience in this lineup, but the ones who are new to the league have really played well. I think just about as good as you could have hoped for. I think that's a little bit promising for the future. I think they've got a pretty good core in place, which is a little bit unusual for a team that's coming off a Memorial Cup run. It is a little bit surprising, I think, that they're in the playoff race this late. I think a lot of people probably expect them to maybe be in the basement, completely out of it this time of year. But I think them being in it, even if they don't make it, these next few weeks will be a good experience for this team to play meaningful games down the stretch.
There is some carryover, in particular Brady Burns, who leads the team in scoring. What's he meant to the Sea Dogs team this year?
I think he's been a great asset, obviously. For a young team, you're always going to kind of have that inconsistency, and we see that a lot. With a lot of St. John's young players, you can kind of see the potential and see the promise there, but like a lot of young players, a lot of young teams, they have a few good games, and then they go quiet for a few games. But Burns has been a little bit more consistent than those young guys, which has been good. He's been really important because one of St. John's other veteran forwards, Peter Reynolds, has been hurt a lot of the year, so Burns has really kind of been responsible for really carrying a lot of this offense, and he's done a pretty good job.
Travis Crickard steps in as head coach. He was obviously an assistant last year on the Memorial Cup team. Probably helps to have some continuity there. What do you make of what he's done behind the Sea Dogs bench this year?
I really like what he's done. I think you can kind of see that he's really putting a lot of responsibility on the players on and off the ice. And we've seen some, I would call it some bold moves by Crickard. I think there was a game or two earlier this year where St. John played a defenseman short because they had someone as a healthy scratch, which is not something you'd see a lot of coaches do. I think he's trying to create a really strong culture, and a culture that's kind of carried over from what Gardner McDougall created in a very short time with the Sea Dogs. And obviously McDougall's very successful. So I think from what I can tell, he's been a good influence on this young Sea Dogs team. And he's kind of I'd say maybe a little bit of new age coach. He even suspended himself for a period. There was a game in Rimouski earlier this year. The Sea Dogs were winning by a blowout. Crickard called a timeout late in the third period, and obviously Rimouski wasn't happy about that. Crickard defended the move, but after a week off, he changed his mind and perspective on the decision and decided to bench himself for a period as a self-imposed suspension for what he did. That's not something you would see many coaches do. I don't know if I've ever seen that anywhere at any level, but I think that's kind of what Crickard's trying to instill on this team, is that kind of attitude where you're responsible for your actions.
I'm not sure I've seen that move myself before. You talked about the Sea Dogs having some young players. I think part of that goes back to the core of 05s they picked in the 2021 draft that they knew could step in this year when roster spots open up. Vince Élie's a part of that group. What do you make of him as a rookie in the queue this year?
He's been really impressive. You can see the skill there. He's a guy who I think Crickard has had a bit of influence on, where he's been a healthy scratch here and there. Even in the second half, where I think you expect him to kind of step in the lineup. And Élie, I think you maybe want to see him be a little bit more consistent, but he's obviously shown at times that he has a lot of skill. He's a smaller player, but I think he's going to be able to excel at the Q level if he kind of brings a high compete level every game. And I think Crickard's a good coach for him, and I'm curious to see what he can kind of do moving forward. And like you said, this is a pretty decent core of what the Sea Dogs have, maybe a bit more decent than what Memorial Cup hosts have had following their hosting year in the past. So Ellie's going to be a key part of that moving forward.
One thing the Sea Dogs seem to have always done is establish a pipeline to Ontario, and it's interesting because that's continued regardless of who the GM or who the coach was. You look at Reinhardt, Benoit, Tivy, and Ianella, they are all part of the current St. John team. How important has that group been collectively to the team?
I don't want to say it's completely essential, because you can obviously fill your team with local guys if you really want to, but I think if you want to kind of retool this as fast as you can, given your limited assets that the Sea Dogs have. The Sea Dogs don't have a ton of draft picks, obviously, last draft or the upcoming drafts. And I think that the pipeline's key if you want to kind of turn this thing around as quick as you can and bring in some older guys as well. And these Ontario guys, they've been pretty impressive so far. And Ianella especially, he came in the second half and he has 3 goals in his last 4 games. So he's quickly found his touch as a defenseman in this league. Sea Dogs have had quite a bit of success with these Ontario guys in the past, like you mentioned. Not just on the ice. I think they've had some pretty good success bringing these guys in, impressing in the league, and then flipping them for assets down the road.
Talk about free agents. Another part of that is tapping into, I guess we could say, the international pipeline when they brought in Vincent Depont, who represents Switzerland internationally but has Canadian citizenship. He's had a bit of a unique Q career. How do you think he's adapted to the North Mirror?
He's had an interesting career, and I remember his first preseason game. He was hitting everything. I think he had 3 or 4 penalties, and it was obvious that he was going to have a hard time. Not a hard time, but it's going to be an adjustment period for him to kind of dial back that physicality style to playing within the Q's rules. And we've definitely seen him dial that back. A guy who didn't play a ton of times last year, especially in the second half. I think he was a healthy scratch for all the Memorial Cup games, but this year, obviously, providing a veteran presence for this league. Not a guy who's going to provide a lot of offense, but he's been pretty good defensively at times, and a guy who does bring some toughness to this lineup, and that's something the Sea Dogs don't have a ton of. I know he's looking at some options of turning pro next year, going back to Switzerland, so this might be his final stretch that we see here at St. John.
Lastly, I wanted to take a look off the ice because, as I mentioned, you run the Station Nation blog, which does a great job of kind of covering all things Sea Dogs. And St. John has really kind of gone outside the box this year with the marketing. I think there was a Lady Gaga tribute act. We had the Spice Girls tribute act New Year's Eve. How much do you think they've succeeded in making the atmosphere fun there in the games you've been able to go to? And how much is that keeping the team in the limelight when the win-loss record isn't the best compared to previous seasons?
I think this is kind of typical what you see for a team that probably isn't going to draw a lot of people based on the on-ice product alone, given that this is a rebuilding season, and it's a rebuilding season where there's not a huge amount of first overall picks or anything like that in the lineup to kind of bring people in. So I think being creative has kind of been essential, and Sea Dogs, they really liked what happened during the Memorial Cup. The events that happened during the Memorial Cup really took over the city, really impacted the city. And you couldn't really go anywhere around St. John without seeing Memorial Cup stuff anywhere. And the Sea Dogs really wanted to kind of take that energy, kind of bottle it up and kind of sprinkle it in through this season, which is obviously a challenge. It's hard to get that Memorial Cup vibe back without having the on-ice product, but I think they've done a pretty good job at trying to do so. And they've done a lot of musical acts, kind of bridging that music and hockey experience together. And that's something that when TD bought the naming rights to TD Station, that was something that was kind of the expectation. But then COVID happened. So we haven't seen a lot of those concerts courtesy of TD, but we're starting to see those more now that life is returning to normal, which has been cool. I mean, I think we'll probably see a lot more of those in the future because they've seemed to be pretty successful and people seem to have really enjoyed them.
Great insight on everything going on with the Sea Dogs. Jamie, thanks for telling us all about it. Have fun covering the team the rest of the year.
Thanks, bud.
That is Jamie Tozer, runs the Station Nation blog. You're listening to the intermission of Cape Breton Credit Union Eagles Hockey, 1270 CJCB.